So Sigi, if we can start with you and ask, in a way, the extent to which EU funding programmes support marine research and innovation, and the new proposed Horizon Europe programme, how it differs from the last one.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Brian, actually, for setting out so beautifully with the film what we are as well co-funding. I think that's the best illustrative answer. So I would like really now to focus a little bit maybe on the new program, because we have on the 7th of June just put forward the proposal for the next 7 years program for research and innovation from 21 to 27. And we are very proud that it is actually attached to a 100 billion euro proposal. Whether we get that or not will depend on many factors, but we are very optimistic. Now, you asked me to highlight what is new. But first of all, as our commissioner says, it is not a revolution, it is an evolution. So we have learned from the past. We will keep really our objectives, which are mainly focusing on strengthens the EU scientific and technological basis. We want to continue to help really to boost, to invest in research and innovation, because investing in research and innovation is our future. We have heard for 1.5 days how important that is. It is investing in our citizens, but it's also investing in Europe and really putting Europe in pole position to drive investments. We want as well to focus much more on the needs of citizens. We have been doing that, we try, we are not always the best champions to do that. So, and we want really as well to connect the science that is funded and the innovation, bring it back to the citizens. The new proposal, Horizon Europe, will keep the three-pillar structure. There are 2 novelties which I just wanted to highlight very briefly. One is we are very good, actually, to be champions in research, but we are not good in Europe to bring research to the market. The whole innovation potential is not yet really working. We do not have the unicorns of this world. We have only 26 in Europe. So one of the novelties will be the establishment of a European Innovation Council, which is really helping innovators to scale up their projects, to fund the highly risked funding models, business models, innovation that they need, to enter new markets, to scale up, to commercialize. And that will be a one-stop innovation really opportunity. The second one is that the program will have missions, and you have heard yesterday John Belland, the Commissioner again, Quinn, referred to a model, something which has been quoted as an example. Why not having a plastic-free ocean mission? Because missions, how we conceive them, how we develop them, must really have a bold, recognizable, well-defined target and objective. It must be based on a series of actions. It's a kind of portfolio of actions. It must be transsectorial. It must bring all the different citizens, municipalities, researchers, regulators, the whole private sectors together. And so a plastic-free ocean would lend itself fantastically, hopefully, for a mission, but it needs to be co-created by citizens and by anyone really who would like to join it. Otherwise, it will not have that impact that we are aiming at for the future.
And we might talk a little bit later about the application of research for, societal reasons. But I was going to go to Ciarán Seoighe, and do I pronounce your name properly?
Yeah, very good.
Seoighe, okay, grand. Science Foundation Ireland. Just if you could tell us a little bit about some of the flagship funding research programs that the Science Foundation has been involved in.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the questions I can answer by looking at Brian's fantastic presentation earlier and saying what he said.
Yeah,
So within SFI, we fund a number of large-scale programs, and in fact a wide range of programs, from small through to large. In the marine sector in particular, I mean, the large-scale programs would be the likes of MARI. MARI would be a flagship in this space. They are marine and renewable energy. It's one of the key areas in which we focus attention, focus research. In that space alone, in the last number of years, it's been about in excess of 40 million of investment from SFI. And this is across the centres, which is, there's 17 of those now. The centres very much are our flagships. Right? They are where scientists work together, and they've created a massive profile for us in Ireland. There's, of the 17 of them, they work collaboratively. And then they work in spokes as well. So in fact, 2 hours ago this morning, we announced another spoke in sustainable energy and fuel efficiency. And spokes are where then the researchers get together and work with industry partners to develop much more sort of impactful and sort of technology-ready solutions. So a combination of the research centres like MARI and then the spokes, they account for a large part of the research funding and what we do as SFI. And then within that, beyond it, there's individual research programs for individual researchers. There's programs for PhD students and a wide range beyond that. So we're very proud of our research centres.
Good. Well, passing it on there to Niall McDonough. Niall, the Marine Institute, how do you support research and innovation?
So the Marine Institute has an important and multifaceted role in supporting marine research and innovation at national level. We are, when I say multifaceted, we are a research performer, we are a research funder, and we have a role in coordinating marine research and innovation nationally and linking to international. So already that sounds quite complex, but it goes right back to the Marine Institute Act of 1991, which preceded the establishment of the Institute, which says the Institute is responsible for promoting, coordinating and undertaking marine research. So it's right there in our Act. When I say research performer, we have research teams within the Institute that are active, that are undertaking projects with national and international partners across a whole range of important policy and related topics, from oceanography and climate through to fisheries, marine biodiversity and ecosystems, and marine environmental research, fish health research and seafood safety research, and so on. So there's a range of research teams and research focus areas that are providing research outputs which are relevant to national policy objectives. As a research funder, we have to separate that function out. So we are also a research funder. And as a research funder, we manage a competitive marine research and innovation program. And I was really pleased that Brian put up a couple of slides on the national strategy for marine research and innovation, because that's an important component here. We do have a national strategy. It was launched, as Brian showed, it was launched at this event last year by Minister Creed. And it provides the framework that guides strategic funding of marine research and innovation in Ireland. And what we do is we assist the process of that coordination, but it's really important to note that that's done across the funding landscape. So that also we work with other funding agencies like Science Foundation Ireland, like EPA, Geological Survey of Ireland, and so on, often through co-funding mechanisms which we fund with them, etc., to ensure that the research funding is targeted at the areas identified in that strategy that Brian put up. And that's the sort of, that's linking, if you like, our research funding mechanism to our national coordination role. But just to finish, on the funding side, just to give you some numbers, for example, in the period 2014 to 2017, we invested around 28.4 million in research funding through our competitive calls, and that's across a range of things like annual calls for ship time, networking and travel for marine researchers, PhD scholarships, and then for targeted calls, we've had targeted calls on things like ocean governance and maritime law, a major award last year, marine research, small equipment and infrastructure, and this year we've just closed a call targeted at SMEs for industry-led projects, so SMEs to come forward with research projects, and we're funding that to the tune of 2 million.
Okay, well, Gearóid, Mooney, and if we can pass the mic on down to Gearóid. Enterprise Ireland, Gearóid, how does it support research and development? And our indigenous companies, how ready are they, and what capacity do they have to undertake research and development?
Well, the one thing we can say is that we know innovation makes a difference to our client companies. It's not an ambition anymore. There's some national figures will be published shortly, which shows that up to about 2002, the difference between companies who were innovative in Ireland and those that weren't was very marginal. But since then, the companies that haven't invested in R&D, on average, have been in decline in terms of revenues, efficiency, employment numbers, and those that have invested have been going the other way, and that gap is getting ever wider. So we know innovation is really important to our companies. So starting from the companies out, we fund through investment new startup companies, particularly those who have got interesting and disruptive technologies. For more mature companies then, we will co-fund in-company R&D programs for them, because again, we can see that the companies that have invested in our portfolio in R&D have survived and thrived even through the recession, and that have on average about a 30% better performance than everybody else.
That's
So
very interesting, that it sort of recession-proofs a company.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and hopefully would also help with any other market interruptions such as Brexit and anything else you can think of. So the innovative ones tend to do better. I think the second most interesting thing then is, and we have a range of supports to help companies collaborate with the research system, not in the way that SFI do, but more where the companies have technology problems that they once solved, and we know that the talent in the SFI centres and other research centres is there to work with them on it. And the interesting thing again is that looking at that cohort of companies, their sales, their performance, it's about 100% better than those companies that don't invest in R&D. So we're completely committed to it, and there's a bunch of schemes around that. Also then, we believe it's important not only to look within, but to look without. So we've got the national mandate to promote participation in Horizon 2020 and European programs. And it's an area that Ireland is doing very well in, with the support of the Commission.
So your experience would be that research and innovation, but particularly research, actually does translate into commercial opportunities.
Correct.
And
Correct.
it strengthens a company's ability to survive all sorts of cold winds.
Absolutely.
Turning to Claire Joly and the bigger picture, Claire, the OECD published the Future Ocean Economy Report in 2016, and it forecast global growth in the ocean economy. What sectors have actually grown?
There are quite a number of sectors. I would say all the sectors have grown,
Yeah.
but there are four main domains, I would say, that are really the champions. They include the maritime and coastal tourism, very strong growth, fishing processing, port activities. We just heard about Cork. Definitely there are strong potential here. And offshore wind, which is really dramatically growing in just a few years. And I would say you have four main factors that are pushing for all these developments. Not only technological maturity in some cases, but also new markets that are opening up. When I was much younger, I do remember that we used to eat salmon on special days.
Yes.
Now it's just so common that indeed that opens even more appetite, I would say, for customers. Another third item would be here the government demand for ever more data on the oceans. That's particularly for surveillance and monitoring of all aspects. I think that's going to be an ever stronger driver for many of the sectors that I identified before. And finally, social changes. So aside from all these technologies that we have talked about, there is strong push from a number of countries in particular to develop new tourism practices. And I'm not sure about Ireland, but in France and in other parts of Europe, there's a strong, I would say, Chinese push for tourism activities. And this links also to cruise tourism, and coastal tourism. And we see some of the challenges appearing now, particularly Lisbon and other places that are struggling to deal with this rise in economic activities linked to cruise tourism. So I would say it is very vibrant, and we are starting to sense some of the environmental externalities of this rapid growth of the ocean economy.
Yeah, but Sigi, just picking up on what Claire said there, the need for research and innovation to do more than simply feed growth or economic growth, the need for it to have a societal or a social aspect as well. Has that always been understood? Have we understood the need to see that society benefits as well as merely the economy from innovation and research?
But it has probably been understood. Whether it has been translated into action, I think that's the real challenge. I think there are different layers we have to tackle this issue. First of all, when researchers do research, they're not always very good in communicating what they do, to bring it really back and to explain the type of research which they're doing for the benefit of daily lives, improving daily lives, simple messages.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is one issue, and we have tried to really address that. The second issue is that we should really disseminate the research results, and I see, David, where are you? It's the Columbus project that, I don't know whether, yes, you're still here, okay. So it is really it's the technology transfer, it's to see how can the research results be much better disseminated. And there again, it's the technology transfer, it's the knowledge transfer activities. We are trying now to improve that as well, but it needs to be done at every really single basis. Another issue that we have tried to address is the skills and professional development. Within each single research project, there should be a training component because there's a huge skills gap. Looking only at the digital skills, I mean, there is, I think, 40% of the European workforce needs to be upskilled in digital skills. So what we have tried now to do is to include in every single research project that we fund an impact criteria, that every project should as well allow for such training, because that is bringing it back, because we do invest in the future talents. And the last but very complicated issue is how really to bring it to innovation. And when we talk about innovation, it is the social innovation, it's the market-driven innovation, it's all the forms of innovation. And there we are still, I think, struggling. That is the reason why in future we will hopefully really address this by creating a European Innovation Council.
Okay. Well, Ciarán, can I just bring it back again to that question of society as a whole benefiting from research and innovation, that it shouldn't simply be a commercially based activity?
Okay, so this is a very important element of what SFI drives. We look on the impact economically, of course, but there is a societal benefit. And that comes in many flavors. Sigi alluded to it there. Education is a very important part of what we do. So we are future-proofing our economy by ensuring that we are educating the researchers, the PhD students and postdoctoral students today, who will be the ones in the future that attract investors to the country, and who will future-proof our economy as well as jobs change. These STEM technologies, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, these are the core skills and courses that are preparing people for jobs today that don't exist yet. So from that perspective, there's a big societal benefit. There are other benefits. For example, if you look at the work that MARI does, I mean, they are very important in the development of policy. So policy around marine and oceans, plastics, climate change, and they feed into that. So the beauty of it is we have researchers that we are funding, experts in their field, who are then working directly with government to help with developing the policies and bringing the latest thinking and know-how and knowledge to it.
And picking up on Sigi's point about every research project involving an element of training, is that something you're conscious of?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the training element is part of what develops it, so the PhD students that come through in the training. But moreover, there are other training programs that we've started to introduce as well, where we collaborate around training to bring entrepreneurship as well to the students. So sometimes the skills and training that we bring includes taking them across overseas. We work with the NSF in the US. There's I-Corps programs there, which is about helping companies that would traditionally be spinning off to actually develop those skills as entrepreneurs as well as scientists and engineers.
Just a last question then, and it's sort of pushing on the education and training mode. Do you think sometimes that our universities have focused too much on short-term commercial type of research and innovation rather than perhaps what a third-level institution should be doing, which is on supporting scholarship generally and wider societal needs?
This is something we keep a very close eye on, and we monitor on a regular basis to understand it. And it's something that also changes as the economic environment in which we operate changes. And so, the times change from a very difficult commercial perspective for the country economically through to different times where we are now. So we do monitor this. And what we try to make sure is that we get that balance right. In all things, it's balance. So part of what we had to do is make sure that we as a country were very good as scientists. I mean, we look in science in many ways, right? There's science for competitiveness, there's science for society, as we just discussed, and there's science for science, right? These are the elements that we have to look at. Much of what we fund allows us to do the science for science, right? Which is the curiosity-driven and but orientated fundamental science. It's orientated towards solutions, and they could be societal and economic solutions. There is a greater shift, and Sigi just referred to it earlier on now, to mission-led science, so solving grand societal challenges and problems, which is something that as SFI we're also shifting towards. And it is part of our sort of review. I mean, our tagline is for what's next. So part of our job is to be horizon scanning, looking at what we should be doing, what we should be funding. So we do look into that model to understand what behaviors we're driving by the metrics we measure and how we do it and what we fund. There is a broad range of programs that we fund in order to challenge and tackle these issues, and we evolve those over time just to make sure that we try to keep that balance right.
Yeah. Well, perhaps turning then to Gearóid, just again on that question of, if society is going to fund research and innovation, society has to see a reward for it. And while I absolutely accept that you've indicated that the sort of research and innovation that Enterprise Ireland has funded has done an awful lot of good for the companies that took it on. But what in terms of the wider social application of that sort of research? Or are you going to say, well, that ain't our job?
I could say that.
You could.
But I do think we have to be careful when we're judging what we expect from a research system. And I'm always reminded that at its most fundamental, it is trained people. And trained people are just as relevant to industry as they are to government and solving other problems. But without the trained people, none of those things can happen. I think the second most important thing is that reputational thing from a country point of view, that Ireland is recognised as having the talent, because that helps to attract foreign direct investment and a whole bunch of other things, just from a reputational point of view. And probably the bit that we've tended here in the last few years to obsess about a little bit too much is the commercialisation impact. Without all three actually delivering for us, we could say the system is not working. And I believe that we have made significant impact on all three. I think the talent coming out is outstanding and recognised internationally. I think from an FDI point of view, it's been effective. And I think from a commercialisation point of view, if you benchmark our performance against the US or the UK, we're up there with them in terms of the size of our system.
And Niall, in terms of the Marine Institute, I mean, how successful has Ireland been in attracting funding for marine research? I mean, obviously you guys support it, but other than that?
Yeah, so, I mean, I talked about a little earlier about the sort of national picture and the national strategy. But that links also very strongly to our performance internationally. And we have a marine research community in Ireland that is very competitive in that area. We have been extremely successful amongst that community in winning funding from the major European programs, such as the Horizon 2020 program and previous framework programs. I mean, for example, Gearóid's colleague in Enterprise Ireland have a role in managing the national support mechanism for Horizon 2020, and Gearóid's colleague Imelda Lampkin leads that. And one of the things they do is they collect information and data in terms of our performance across the whole program, how we're performing. They benchmark it against other countries. Denmark, Finland would be countries we benchmark ourselves traditionally against to see how we're doing and how we differ. We do very well, generally speaking, across all areas.
In terms of that.
In marine, we do even better.
Even better.
We have higher figures for marine in particular.
Okay, well, if I can put a question to yourself and also to Gearóid and to Ciarán about Brexit and the extent to which Brexit could affect funding for research or cooperation on research. Is that a worry?
It's unquestionably an issue that's, you've seen it throughout the course of this whole conference, that every sector, from fisheries and seafood and logistics right through to the research and research funding is looking at Brexit. And Ireland is going to be very, very much in the front line of the impacts of what Brexit could have. It's a challenge and it's an opportunity. And I think that's, again, been a common theme. It's a challenge for us in the sense that we have traditionally very strong links with UK partners. And the UK have been especially successful in winning international funding. They are very good at it.
And they're very good. I mean, they were pretty central, weren't they, to the research and innovation that brought about the reduction in offshore energy costs?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They have very strong research teams. They have the economies of scale. They coordinate more EU projects than any other country. So removing them from the system, if that's going to happen, will have major impacts because, to be honest, as a much smaller neighbouring country, we would probably have worked in very closely with our traditional partners who would coordinate projects, and we link in there as partners. We now have an opportunity, however, to step up into that space. We may be the last English-speaking EU country. Whether that's an advantage or not remains to be seen, but we certainly have a strong track record that we can build upon to maybe fill some of the space that's been vacated by UK researchers. And we are seeing, rightly or wrongly, a pullback in that respect, whereby UK researchers are telling me they're no longer being invited to participate in proposals in the way they would have been before.
Which is a shame.
Absolutely, it's a shame, I agree.
Ciarán, the disruptive effect of Brexit on research arrangements.
Yeah, I mean, it can be the same thing, a bit of a challenge and an opportunity. I mean, one of the important parts for SFI is attracting really good talent, star researchers to Ireland. They have a sort of a magnetic effect, and they create pools of researchers and skills around them.
More clusters.
Clusters, really, yes. Maybe not in Cork necessarily, but yeah. I suppose that this is an opportunity for us in some ways as well, but at the same time, the UK will be a big competitor for exactly the same pool of resources and people, and they were trying to attract the same star researchers. Ironically, one of the challenges we get sometimes is that the weather in Ireland isn't great, so I think at this point would be a good time to explain that come to Ireland. And it's, we are extending our global footprint then as a result as SFI, so we are working in the US to attract researchers there. Announced research fellowships only this week with the National Science Foundation in China as well, just to build partnerships and grow our footprint. And the important part here is that we do really good research that puts us on the world stage. And when we are ranked very highly as a research and innovation country, that will keep us in the FDI framework. And
okay, so your glass is half full. Gearóid, the dangers from Brexit in terms of disrupting the cooperation arrangements and even the funding for research.
I think Niall was speaking there a minute ago. The key word he used was if. We actually don't know. And I think the most important thing we've got to be alert to are the opportunities and as they come up, and the agility then to actually capitalize on them. And to kind of, if we talk about and Niall mentioned the importance of UK researchers in the projects that Irish researchers are engaged on. Actually, our numbers would show that the UK is not our number one partner currently in Europe. Actually, Germany, in fact, UK may be number 3 or 4 in terms of the frequency with which our researchers collaborate with them.
So Germany is in fact a bigger partner?
Yeah, for us, as things currently stand, looking at it statistically. Now, that's not to in any way dismiss the potential fallout. But again, I think we're back to we don't actually know what precisely is going to happen yet. But when we do, we need to be quick to cope with that.
Yeah. Claire, I left you out of that discussion, as I did Sigi, because Brexit is our particular political potato. But just before I go to the audience, opportunities for more cooperation internationally. Do you see those? Do we need those?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But as my friends in New York say, when it's not broken, when it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Yeah.
There are quite a number of examples that we heard over the past couple of days, including, of course, the successful Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. When you have a few champions that are actually coming together, that's a great place to actually do common research. And we see that this can be extended to other parts of the world. There's another crucial element, I think, and that will link to innovation. It's the Blue Tech initiatives from our colleagues from the different clusters. I think that there's a lot of opportunities here for exchanges, international exchanges between the different clusters. So there are different models that exist that could be maybe more known. There's still a lot of outreach to be done for the ocean economy in general. So with this, I think supporting what exists already would be very valid. And maybe one last point concerning at the really international level, there's the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. It's a UN body that brings together different ocean science community. And with this recent announcement that there's going to be a decade for ocean science coming up, I think that's going to bring a lot of opportunities indeed for different countries to position themselves and position their researchers in large international programs. So I think the main challenge here is to keep abreast of all the different initiatives that are going on around the world.
Okay. Well, we're just going to throw it to the audience in case there's anybody who'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Can we get a microphone up here? If you just, yeah. Have we got a microphone? Right.
Dígí Mark White with the Russell Gaeltachta. A super session this morning, and I've been working in the Marine for some time, and some of my colleagues will groan when I talk about the greedy gene. But one of the issues, I think, is that in the marine space, the academics and the scientists haven't had their greedy gene itched. So if you look at biotech, biomed, IT, pharma, where academics have had the greedy gene itched, and the person up the corner is driving a large car and is attracting all of the really top PhD students and is getting the money. And it generates a move of science out of the lab into the commercial workplace. And I think that's something that's largely not happened in marine.
Because the people involved in marine research are mad idealists who don't have any greed in their souls?
Well, I think they're not necessarily mad idealists. I've been in marine myself a long time, and I'm probably very mad. But they're people who just haven't seen that role of scientific research from the lab into commercialization. And if you look at the kind of numbers that Niall was talking about that have been applied to seaweed, for example, in a relatively short period of years, public funding on research in seaweed of about 40 million has been spent in Ireland. And almost none of that has moved into the commercial regime. So with a former employer, I see them on the far side of the room here, I worked for the Marine Development team, and we worked very closely with Enterprise Ireland and succeeded in getting funding for the National Marine Incubation Manager in the Entrepreneurship, which is at Mara in Cork, which Brian alluded to earlier on. It is about that activity to try and encourage entrepreneurs into the gap between academia and the business space. In Údaráis now, we have an active project which is called Park Namara. And Park Namara is on a piece of land that Údaráis owns. So Údaráis for years has been developing industrial estates and putting advanced factories and facilities onto industrial estates. But never before has it set about an industrial estate which is marine focused. So Park Namara, which on which the whole activity, the work, the spend has begun now, is about trying to pre-license, get planning permission for, get the foreshore licensing for, get aquaculture licensing, so that companies can come to a location and go plug and play with seawater on tap, fresh water on tap, and a cluster of marine companies. And I suppose my question, as part of that, there would be a marine innovation and development center. So a place where companies can come, innovate and develop, but in an environment where companies are active. We have a cluster of Utheros-backed companies in the area. Some of them are out in the tent at the moment, people like Air Composites and Wanda, some of those companies. I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on how it is we incentivize the transfer, and I know Sigi is interested in this question as well. How do we incentivize in a real way the transfer of this fabulous marine research and development expertise into the generation of that horrible word called wealth? Because if we can get wealthy people, they'll employ folks, and that tide will lift those boats. And I think that's an important move that we need to give more thought to in this marine space.
Okay, I'm just going to put that question then to Sigi. The point being made, he's not exactly saying greed is good, but he's obviously saying that it has a place. Isn't that right? It has a place. How do we incentivize the transfer of expertise and research onto a commercial basis and to wealth?
Yes. First of all, I think that the potential of the blue economy is starting only now to be perceived widely, because we normally really look at everything which is happening on land. So that is something that will need to be changed. And as I said before, we are very good in producing knowledge, but we are very good in producing knowledge, but very bad actually then to translating it into wealth. But that's also a general, I think that is a general lack in Europe, because Europe, the whole investment from the private sector in the potential wealth creation is 1.3% compared to 2.6 or 3% in the United States and in Japan, or now even China has a higher investment rate. Yeah. So I think it's a general really issue, not specifically to marines. Marine is now really developing, catching up, but then it's also, we saw that in the film of Brian, it's not sometimes the time lag from developing the technology, testing it, losing it, because there is a high risk element maybe attached when it is in the really extreme conditions out in the sea. That is also an element that needs to be taken into account. Where does the investment come from? From the private sector, or do they take the risk? Or is that not really the place where the public money should invest? And that is what we now try partly to do. We have just published a call for a demonstrator for multipurpose platforms in future. So that call is published. I think the closing date is next February 2019, because we want really to bring it at a higher level of demonstrator level. And then hopefully the private sector will come in when it is at a TRL level which is mature.
Okay, and I'll pick up on some of those points in a minute with you. I just see somebody else has been trying to get in here, and just let him in because we're running low on time.
Thank you very much indeed, Olivia. It's a bit of a continuation. My name is John Smith from a company called Blue Wind, and my question is a bit of a continuation of the point that was raised by Mark. And taking on board the discussion that took place in the earlier session, where we talked about establishing a hub in Cork for the financial services equivalent, should we consider establishing a similar type hub for the offshore wind sector in light of the opportunity that's out there?
Okay, and maybe put it in Galway. Okay, I think I saw another hand up there, did I? Yeah, just if we'll take your point, they're coming up with a microphone to you there now.
I'm Berna Grist from University College Dublin, and my point and question really arises from Brian O'Gallagher's video. he showed us the picture of the development of tidal energy devices, and then you had some photos of marine life which had been damaged. And I'm wondering, does your work include the impact on wildlife which is going to be potentially caused by these devices? And then to broaden it out a little bit, looking at the people on the platform who support research, how do those who support research and innovation build in protection for species and habitats? We all know that if you have a plan or a program or a project, you have to subject it to appropriate assessment. And that is the sort of idea I have. I'd be very interested to hear the answers. Thank you, Olivia.
Okay, right. Actually, Brian is here. Would you mind bringing him over the microphone? Because that's a very specific question, I think, for him. Yeah.
Thank you, and it's a very good question. And actually, when we started looking at the tracking of mammals and marine life, it was in order to understand the implications of new technology development in the marine space and how it would impact. Now, we've broadened that to also look at tracking of marine life to try and understand the ocean. But you're exactly right. We need to make sure that when we're developing the marine economy, we're doing it in a sustainable way. So from the outset, we had a strong focus on that. Thank you.
Okay. And Niall, perhaps I might put the question about developing a hub for offshore and everything to do with offshore. What do you think, or would you say that the Marine Institute already is that hub?
Well, there's a lot of activity in this area. So MARI itself is an SFI funded centre which is very focused on this area of developing offshore renewables, has a lot of projects and activity there. And we heard that from Brian earlier. I'll mention in particular a project that they are involved in with a range of industry partners. I think there's about 8 or so companies, I'm not sure the exact number, but I've been linking in with that project called Airwind. And that's where they're working directly with companies to understand their needs almost in real time. This is one of the issues. Companies' needs and industry needs change rapidly all the time. Yeah. And research is a slower pace. You've got to be able to keep with that pace of what they need. And they're looking at where offshore wind will best be deployed around the coast of Ireland so that we're able to do it in a way that's most suitable, that's appropriate in terms of the site locations, linking up with the grid and so on. Just to mention, we also have offshore test sites, and we heard the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland session yesterday, and they are very engaged in supporting the development of this. Marine Institute is very supportive as well in terms of running test sites in Galway Bay where we can it's possible to deploy test technologies, including wind, to test these technologies that can support the development of these sectors. So I would say there's a lot of activity already in place.
And just a quick question, Ciarán, Sigi mentioned the fact that you have to have publicly backed and financed research as well as private sector backed research, that perhaps they both have different roles. And this is still going back to the question about whether or not people involved in research in the marine area need somewhere to have that greed factor in order to bring it to commercial use.
Right, so if we go back to the greed question, I mean, the first thought is maybe we'll ask one of our biotech centres to look at activating that gene. It's a project we might fund. Joking aside, there is a program that we operate which is around exactly that, taking knowledge and information out of the universities. So there's always the risk that knowledge gets stuck in the universities, that it doesn't necessarily come out and doesn't translate. So we have an industry fellowship program where we literally fund taking industry experts out of their labs, putting them into local enterprises in Ireland. I think there's about 150 of them have been transplanted in this way since the program began. And the idea there is to take that knowledge out of the labs, translate it into enterprises, help then these enterprises develop new opportunities, new work. MARI has actually been engaged in the same program, and that helps then take the enterprises up to that next level. And then there's the handshake, obviously, with our EI colleagues who then develop it to the next stage.
Okay, and Gearóid, just a quick point to you again on the point that Sigi, in fact, raised, that publicly financed research and privately financed research may have different roles?
They may have different roles, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they can be blended very well where both objectives are met. I mean, if you look at some of the greatest advances in science that have ended up in medical devices that have treated people,
Yes.
they have both. So I just think if we manage that properly, it'll work out. Just briefly on Mark's question, I think one of the things we have to be cognizant here is that the marine industry in Ireland is still in its development phase. And it's one thing having the technologies, it's another thing having the entrepreneurs who are willing to take it on, or the existing companies who are willing to see the opportunities. And I think time will cure it.
Okay. Listen, thank you to our terrific panel this morning. Give them a hand, guys. And I'd now like to call on Peter Heffernan to close the conference.
Thank you all, and it only remains to conclude. I want to really congratulate Olivia once again for an outstanding performance for the last day and a half. You add a certain professionalism and panache to the whole thing that I think makes it even that bit more memorable. I want to invite you all now to experience Seafest 2018. There's some incredible displays, some incredible entertainment, and live it. Thank you all.